Welcome, y'all. It's West DIY Food Plot Pro. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's episode, we're talking about 4 things that we must do before implementing a habitat and food plot program on our deer hunting farms. Many folks reach out and want me to do a consultation on the farms, and we start going through these properties, and we're designing these properties that are the best for the whitetails and they're best for us, right? That's really an important thing, is that we can absolutely make these whitetails use this property, but we also have to make these designs and make these plans the most hunter friendly they possibly can be. So that at times can be a difficult thing, holding as many deer as you possibly can and trying to make it the highest huntability that you possibly can. So on today's episode, we're going to go through some of those things that we need to figure out before we start implementing these habitat or food plot improvements on our deer hunting properties. There's many ways that we can go wrong when we start doing these habitat and food plots on the properties. We put these in the wrong location. We can make this much more difficult on ourselves. The very first thing when you start looking at your property to make habitat or food plot improvements, the very first thing that you have to look at is access. Access has to be at the number one, at the very core of this entire thing. If we have a narrow stretch and we have to walk 1.5 miles in through all our bedding areas to get to our great spot to hunt, it's not a great spot. And if you've watched the channel very long, you understand that that's something that we try to avoid. We try to hunt the outsides. We try to have really good access. Many farms don't have that access. I worked with a landowner last year who had very difficult access. We did all we could with what we had. And when you have that, some things that you can do that can help that access. But the reality of it is a farm either has good access or it doesn't. When you go to trying to hunt those properties, set those properties up, you just have areas that you're susceptible to, that you have to basically not hunt because of that poor access. And so that's something that we run into a lot when we're designing these properties, is you do have areas that are just absolutely tough to access. And many of you know that, and you have properties like that. I have properties like that. But access is the number one thing that we have to look at before we start designing properties. Everything else we can move around to suit access. And I think that's one big thing that when I go out and I do these consultations with folks, that's one thing that's hard for people to get their head wrapped around. They're like, well, the sign's here. Well, the sign is there, but the access is terrible here. We can get the sign up here where the access is. By changing some things, we can change where those deer want to be, where those deer are going to be, simply by changing some habitat and food plot type improvements on the farm. The number 2 thing is design your food to the outside of the property. I don't know how many times that I have seen this. Used to do this myself. We all learned and we all kind of go up that ladder, right? But many, many years ago, I did this. When I first started food plotting when I was a little kid, where'd you go? You went to the open in the woods right in the very darn center of the place, and that's where you put your food plot. You didn't think anything about access. You didn't think anything about all that stuff. All you thought about was, hey, this is a good area for a food plot. And it was. It's a wonderful area for a food plot. But it's not a great area to hunt, that food plot. By adding our food to the outside of the property, what we do is we add our cover to the middle, and then we hunt the outsides, and the deer are having known travel corridors going to that outside of that property. That's what we want. We don't want the deer to be bedding on the outside of the property and the food to be in the middle. Well, then how do we hunt? We're having to go through the deer to get anywhere to hunt. So the second thing is to design that food to where it's on the outside of that property where you can access without boogering, without spooking a lot of those deer. And that's easier said than done, but that is something that we do on every single consultation visit that we have. We put food on the edge. The third thing we do is we design travel corridors using natural funnels or blocks. So we can funnel deer to where we want them to be. We do this many different ways. There was a lot of different properties that I went to this year that had steep bluffs. Obviously, that's going to be a natural pinch anyway. Well, if it's a steep bluff on this side and it's not nearly as steep on this side, we can do a lot of hinge cutting and we can force those deer down to one spot. And by doing that, what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up for an area where we have a place where our scent can blow. Those deer are not going to be downwind. And it also sets us up much better for an archery shot when we can say the deer are going to be coming through this spot right here rather than going through a 150-yard spot. we're trying to guess or trying to pull deer to one area, we can simply go in and we can add these travel corridors to make these whitetails enter and exit where we want them to. Also, something that we use a lot, and I have used a tremendous amount this year, is these mock scrapes. And that absolutely puts a deer right where you want them to be. I have had a tremendous amount of success using these mock scrapes the last 2 years. Before then, I had kind of mixed results with them. Last year I used them, had really good results, and this year it's just been through the roof. It's been phenomenal. I like to use grapevines, about an inch in diameter, zip tie it to a limb, and put it on a known travel corridor, on an edge of thicket, mature timber, any kind of a transition zone, ideally between bedding and food. And man, you have got a killer spot to set over in mid to late October, and especially through that rut period as well. So there's things that we can do to design these travel corridors to make these whitetails want to use these areas. So we go in and we do a little clear cut, right? A little bedding cut. Then we go over, we do another bedding cut, right? So when we're hunting these bucks during the rut, they're gonna be cruising the downwind side of these bedding thickets. We move our stands 20, 30 yards off that transition zone between thicket of what we just cut, that clear cut, and the mature timber or the mid-story timber, whatever you have there. We back up 25, 30 yards, and all of a sudden, we've got a highway right here that these bucks are gonna cruise when the wind's blowing like this right here. So we're downwind from them, but they are downwind enough to check all of these. Now, why would a deer do that? Because it would physically take them a very long time to go through here and check every one of these bedding thickets. On a north wind, wind's blowing like this right here, they can cruise down this little road that we're on right here. They can check every single one of these bedding thickets for hot does in a matter of minutes. That's what a buck's doing during the rut. He's traveling, he's covering as much ground as he possibly can. That brings us to our last point, and that's designing the bedding areas. That's what I was just talking about earlier, is you go in and you do a thinning cut, maybe a clear cut, maybe a thinning cut, depending on what your habitat looks like and what that area has. I've done a little bit of both. I typically lean more towards that clear cut than I do the thinning cut, because around here we have a lot of big trees. There's a lot of mid-story stuff as well, a lot of maples and stuff that are growing. So if we cut down some of our big trees, we have some mid-story growth already happening. So what I typically do is I go in there and I'll cut majority of them down. I'll go through with my chainsaw and I'll cut the paths that I want those deer to use, make that easy. So when I go in there and I do any hinge cutting, the only hinge cutting that I'm gonna do is I'm directing traffic in those travel corridors like what I was telling you about earlier. That's a great way to block a deer's travel. If you've got a deer that is constantly coming down over here on you, fall a tree right there. Hinge cut that tree right behind you, and that way those deer are forced to go out in front of you, and then you're downwind from them, rather than being the opposite way and them being downwind from you and blowing and everything like that. So there's a lot of ways that we set these bedding areas up, but the main thing is you got to get sunlight on the ground. That's what's going to get the growth needed to get those whitetails in there, right? That's what is needed for bedding. We need the woody browse. To get the woody browse, we have to have sunlight hitting the ground. So you can look in the woods behind me, mature timber, very little woody browse, almost nothing growing on the forest floor. Very common in our area, very common across the United States. You come in here and you clear cut this pocket right here, and within about 2 to 3 years times, this has grown up into a thicket that I guarantee you there will be a tremendous amount of deer sign in and around that thicket. So putting that thicket in the right spot where you can access it and hunt it is a whole nother deal. That kind of goes back to number one, designing that access. So if we go in and we're cutting all of our bedding thickets way deep in, makes it really difficult to get in there and hunt the bedding thickets. There's a way to set these things up on these properties to where we can get the most advantage out of these farms, but also it's going to be a premium to these whitetails where this is common, right? This is common. Somebody's probably likely thinking, well, deer will bed in that, and they 100% will. There's no question, they'll bed in open woods, but given the choice, where are they gonna bed at? And that's my opinion. I think given the choice, they're gonna bed in the more secure areas. When there's no secure areas or there's minimal secure areas, that's when you have random bedding that is really tough to hunt, because there's no clear access. They're bedded all over the place. It's hard to get in, hard to get out without busting deer, because you got deer, 2 deer bedded here, you got 3 over here, 3 over here. There's no areas that are kind of dedicated for that bedding area to be. If you need help setting up your deer hunting farms, I've got a website set up, www.diyfoodplotpro.com. You can go there, you can click on boots on the ground consultation or boots on the ground visit. I'll come to your property, I'll walk it with you. We'll design all this up, trying to make that property as good as it possibly can be. I'd be more than glad to get you on the books for this year. Just go to that www.diyfoodplotpro.com, click on boots on the ground visit, send me an email, and I'll be glad to get you on the books for this winter. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Y'all smash that like and subscribe button.